Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. Attendance. Now, I would love to go ahead and introduce our featured leader today, Keegan Rice, Senior Statistician at NORC at the University of Chicago. Keegan, thank you so much for joining us. I would love it if you could introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and something you like to do for fun.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. It's really good to see everybody. I see some familiar faces, both on and off camera. So I'm Keegan Rice. I'm a senior statistician at NORC. And if you don't know what NORC is, it is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research institute. And we do a lot of social science type research, a lot of public policy type research, and do a lot of work with federal, state, and local governments and foundations and things like that. So in my role as a senior statistician, actually, weirdly enough, mostly do data visualization and science communication work. I don't do a lot of stat modeling anymore. So I like to joke that I'm a statistician. I don't, get the chance to do a lot of deep modeling anymore, but I lead the development of interactive data explorers and interactive applications of all sorts for various clients with different purposes. And I also research data visualization design when I have time. I spend a lot of time talking to both technical and non-technical groups of people and bridging that gap a little bit. And I work with a lot of really wonderful, brilliant, and kind colleagues who research all sorts of things, education, healthcare, public health, economics, public safety, and I feel like I'm probably forgetting one or three, but a lot of different things. I get to kind of play in everybody's backyard a bit. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
What about something that you like to do outside of work for fun?
I am a big reader, so and also a board gamer, though I haven't
Me too.
been able to board game much recently. But I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, though I definitely had a lull for a few years there. So I'm just kind of getting back into it. So if anyone has recommendations, let me
Oh
know.
my goodness. Well, this is a dangerous topic. Megan Harris and I are both very excited right now.
Yes, I
We're
can
all
see the
gonna,
board games comments in
yep.
the chat.
We're all going to have to like get together after this on LinkedIn and talk about fantasy books and board games. We will spare everybody, but get in the chat and tell me what your favorite board game is. I'm a huge big board gamer and video gamer as well. All right. Oh, it's going to be so distracting watching all those amazing book titles roll in. I have a feeling that someone is going to ask you for a book recommendation later, so be thinking on that. But I wanted to just before we get started, say that one of the reasons that Keegan is here is because I was such a fan of Keegan's Posit conference talk last year. So I'm going to stick it in the chat for everybody. It was a talk called Wait, That's Shiny. And I remember just seeing the title and thinking, ooh, this is going to be about shiny apps that don't look like shiny apps, isn't it? And it absolutely was. Keegan definitely delivered. So I'll pop that in the chat for everybody if I can post. There we go. Definitely go watch that. But I wanted to sort of kick off by asking you just some details around your introduction to Shiny. So, like, did you learn Shiny in undergrad at grad school? Did you think that this is what you would be doing when you were learning statistics?
That's a good question. No, I didn't really think this is what I would be doing. I first started learning it when I was in grad school. So a little bit of background. I have a PhD in statistics. And again, this is why I joke that I'm a statistician because people sometimes forget that actually, that I like went to grad school for 5 years and did statistics because I mostly just visualize things now. But I started playing around with Shiny in grad school and looking at some historical data and some maps. And I made this really really terrible looking back on it now, Shiny app that I called user-friendly at the time. And that was like my master's thesis. And it's really funny to think back on how not user-friendly at all that user-friendly Data Explorer was. But I played around with it a little bit, and then I just kind of didn't think about Shiny for about 3 years, really. I mostly worked non-interactively and did a lot of data analysis and managed a big research project in the rest of my PhD. And then when I joined NORC, I had focused a lot on reproducibility in graduate school. And they were like, oh, so you can code. You should help us on this Shiny project we're working on. And I totally picked it back up right away. And then the rest is sort of history, as they say. I got stuck in this, like, I just want to develop Shiny all the time hole. And now it's been almost 5 years, and that's pretty much what I do all day.
Well, we say stuck. We mean like privileged to be in that
Yes,
position.
yeah. It's a
It's
good hole
great.
to be stuck in.
It sure is. We love Shiny here. Well, I wanted to give a little bit of context for everybody as well. Some things that I know will be great to ask Keegan about, and that I would love to talk with Keegan about. One of the things is, how do you gain authority, gain leadership, maybe without people leadership authority? How do you navigate the technical leadership path where you want to stay engaged in project work, you want to stay engaged in individual contributor work, but you want to move up? You don't necessarily want to be a people manager. This has been on my radar a lot. A lot of people have been asking about it. So that'd be a great thing to talk about with Keegan. And then also a lot about design. Keegan knows a ton about visualization design, app design, and I feel like there's just a wealth of information to talk about there. And then also sort of what it's like being a bridge between highly technical people and less technical stakeholders or design folks, um, and sort of tips and tricks in that area would be fantastic to ask about. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to Slido where, oh my gosh, I already see fantastic questions coming in. Let me go through some of these. Noor, you have a great question. Would you like to unmute and ask that one?
Oh God. Hi. Everyone hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. Cool. I was not expecting to be picked already. Hi, Keegan, right? Please tell I'm saying
Yep.
it right. Yes. Hi. Nice to meet you. I also emphasize the whole coming from statistics and people forgetting. I did actually, my background's math and stats. I do know what you're talking about. But my question more on the data viz side was, what are your top tips for data visualization design that you've accrued over the year through your work and so forth?
That is a great question. So I could probably talk about this forever. So I will try to keep it relatively brief. But I would say one of the biggest tips that I have is really think about who your audience is. So we as data people tend to get really stuck in like our own use of visualizations when we're analyzing data, when we're thinking about what data viz can be used for. You know, we use it a lot in exploratory data analysis, or at least I do. And I think it's really easy to think that, oh, well, I understand this chart, so other people will also understand this chart. Whereas actually, most of the time, if we're working with data, we have much more familiarity and expertise and ability to read charts right off the bat and understand them than most people do. And so I think one of my biggest tips that we've actually found in research that we've done, but also we just apply practically all the time, is that you really have to think about who you're visualizing data for. And if that's not a very statsy or data heavy audience, you might have to actually kind of pull back on how complex of a visual you're using, or really think carefully about your labels, and how you're kind of describing the chart and how you're laying it out. Putting too much data in one visual can actually just be really overwhelming for some people, and they might not even engage with a chart if they look at it and think, I'm really going to have to spend some time to figure out what this is saying. So that's one of my biggest things, is just really trying to put yourself in the shoes of others. And a great trick for this is asking someone who does not visualize data regularly to take a look at your chart and like ask if they understand it. I do this like all the time with my friends. Like I will send them something and be like, does this make sense? And a lot of times they say, no, what are you talking about? And then I fix it. So that's a really handy approach too. It's just to lean on people who maybe aren't as in the data space when you're thinking about visualizing.
I love that. I do this to my husband all the time. He's like, "You're making me feel dumb." I'm like, "No, no, no. If you feel dumb, the visualization is
Yes.
wrong and it is my fault. You are not dumb. Hold on, I'm going to go fix it." And usually that means taking everything away, like getting rid of all of the things that he was feeling dumb having to decipher. So I think that's a fantastic suggestion. Also, when like teaching, that is my main takeaway with students as well, is they want to shove everything that they can into a graph and say, I want one graph to rule them all.
Yeah.
And usually it's the opposite. Fantastic question, Noor, as always. And Kylie, I saw that you had a question that had, I think Laura piled on there as well and said that she had a similar question. I'm going to highlight this in the chat, Kylie, so that not in the chat, in the Slido, so that everybody can see it. Would you be able to unmute and ask that one?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Keegan. Yeah, my question was really surrounding, I think it builds from your data viz answer, but like what are the challenges that you've faced when you're communicating statistical results to non-statisticians, and how have you overcome those? And maybe that's through data viz or just using different words, things like that.
Yeah, another great question. There are a lot of challenges. I think in particular with statistical results, people don't necessarily understand what something like significance means. Or if we're thinking about a statistical model, it's not just what any individual coefficient is that matters. It's really, the model as a whole. And that's something that's really, really hard to communicate. So again, it'll be a little bit of a repeat, but one of the things I do when we're trying to communicate like something from an actual model or a test or some sort of finding is run it past people that aren't statisticians. They might still be researchers, but that don't necessarily, think in statistics language, and see whether they understand what we're trying to say. The other thing I've also tried to do is just not go too overboard with communicating significance, right? So I know there's like a million different discussions that have been had in the past about practical versus statistical significance. And specifically, what I do, a lot of it is very public facing, like public policy type research. And so for that, there is a difference between, when we're showing some sort of summaries of something we tested in a survey, people's opinions about something. Does it really matter if percentages are, if we've like really tested that they're significantly different across groups, or do we just really want to show, what those percentages are and some uncertainty around those estimates, whether or not they might be statistically significantly different? So I think it's kind of a two-pronged, like thinking about whether the actual stat pieces are really, really important to communicate to your audience. And then if they are, checking with people who like don't speak stat fluently, and seeing how we can maybe like update the language to make it a little bit more clear. But p-values, for example, are notoriously very difficult to communicate to people. And I don't think we've really come up with a great solution, but I think just trying to kind of wordsmith the language, and even like asking our communications people, like, can we iterate on what a better way to say this is that's still faithful to what it actually means statistically, but isn't, our standard boilerplate interpretation of a p-value.
I think that's great. If there's any suggestions in the chat, if you have successfully explained p-values to somebody, let us know in the chat how that went, or if you're in favor of just throwing p-values out the window, because that has definitely been a conversation lately as well. Laura Gast had added onto this question a little bit and said, like, sort of related to this non-technical audience thing, how are you countering those, or have you experienced it yet, where people are kind of undervaluing the math side of analytic results, and just saying like, we'll just ask AI. Have you had any experience with people undervaluing the human aspect of a math person job yet?
Oh yeah, this is a good question.
Laura, I hope I asked that faithfully. I might have mangled it a little bit. Yeah, okay. She's giving me this.
Just to add on just a little bit, I also find that leadership asks for, give me a table of A versus B. They don't want a table of A versus B. They want to answer a question, but they don't know, like they have a business question. They don't need the table. How that bridge is the hardest one I've found, to figure out how to get them to ask me their business question so I can use my maths brain to help them solve the question, rather than just put the data in a way for them that's maybe not the most useful, or build a model that's maybe not exactly correct for their question. So that's kind of a little Christmas tree on there.
Yeah. Okay. This is a very amazing question, and I again could probably talk about this forever. But this is one of the key parts of like my day-to-day job, is figuring out how to force people to write down what their research and business questions are, because people do sometimes think that they know what they want. Like when we're building an application, sometimes a client will literally tell us, well, we want a table that looks like this, this, and this. And then once we actually have a more in-depth conversation about what the goals of the tool actually are and what their users might want to do, we really distill it down to like, what are the research questions? And I think, parallel with what are your business questions, right? What is the question you're trying to answer? And we just sort of force people to document their research questions. And then from there, you can think about, how do we actually help people answer that question? And I guess we've had like some medium success, I would say, in, breaking people out of them telling us what they want to see, and instead saying, no, but what is the actual research question? Like if you had to interpret, one of my colleagues has a really great way of breaking this down. She says, if you had to write out what this conclusion is in a sentence, like, can you write it out for me? Like what you want to be able to say. And that kind of helps you back up to, okay, what is the question that you're answering? So like in your case, if they want to see a specific table of A versus B, like asking, okay, what is the conclusion you actually want to draw from seeing that table? And then backing that up to, what's the question you're asking of that table? And then is the table really what you want to see? Or do you actually want to see this other thing that directly answers your question? So that's kind of the, like, I don't know if that fully like helped, but I think just forcing people to think through that sentence of like, what is this like the sentence you're actually going to say about the results that you're seeing in this table or chart or whatever it is. That kind of helps.
I like it. I think that does a great job. Thank you, Laura, for that fantastic question. For the add-on to another fantastic question by Kylie. And I see another one in the chat, or not in the chat, in the Slido, that I really like as well. Megan, I saw you asked. I'm going to highlight that in Slido so that you can see it and everybody can see it. Would you like to ask that live?
Sure, I can. So my question was, as having the title of a data scientist, do you experience any kind of like cognitive dissonance or imposter syndrome because you're not really doing stats anymore? Because same, if so, because that's how I feel right now.
Yes. Great question. And yes, I totally experience that all the time. It's really funny when I just like look at my title sometimes, I'm like, it just doesn't seem right. I should just be like the pictures wizard or whatever, like it's just a different, and my skill set is different. I do think there's a really funny example actually, of a colleague of mine. This was a few months ago. We were in an initial call with a colleague of ours about building a dashboard, and they needed someone to do some statistical work on the front end. And they said, oh, well, Keegan's here, maybe she could do that. And one of my colleagues who works with me on data visualization just kind of off the top of his head was like, oh, if you need someone to do stats, like we'll ask someone else. That's not what Keegan does. And he did not mean anything negative by it at all. He was correct in that, like, if we needed someone to do that, we'd probably pull someone else in, because most of the time that's not what I'm focused on and I prioritize. But of course, then I was like, well, I actually do have a PhD in statistics. So like I could do it, but I'm not going to. and he profusely apologized. And again, he didn't do anything wrong in this situation, but it was kind of funny. Like you get into those weird like situations where people's assumptions of what you can do and what you actually do maybe don't always align and differ across people. And also sometimes I will literally just talk to my statistician colleagues and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I've lost some of that knowledge, but also there's so many different applications of data science and statistics that we always are not always going to know what our colleagues are talking about, right? Because everybody has different subsets, but it's easy to think, I don't know what they're talking about, so I must have forgotten statistics. When really it's probably, I don't know what they're talking about because they have a very specialized type of statistics they're doing that I never learned. Especially on my survey statistician colleagues, because I've never been a survey statistician.
Yeah, I find that a lot. Whenever anyone talks about survival analysis, actually, I'm like, it's just never something I studied or did, and I have absolutely no expertise in survival analysis. But there's other pockets of stats that I do, especially applied stats. When you explained that, I felt very triggered. I was like, oh my gosh, I would be upset if somebody was like, oh, Keegan doesn't do stats. I'd be like, excuse me? I spent how many years in my PhD working on this? Very interesting. You are much more diplomatic and calm than I might have been in that situation. Well, speaking of something that you do have lots of expertise in and are thinking about regularly, Patrick Long asked a question in Slido that I think would be great to talk about. And we can all talk about this in the chat too. Patrick, are you available to ask your question live? Maybe we'll give a second and see if Patrick materializes.
Maybe you start by asking, Libby.
Patrick says, no,
Okay.
sorry. No worries, Patrick. I'm going to ask for you. How do you see data visualization evolving and any good book references recommended? I did see some book references in the chat as well. Like Tim Golden had recommended Nancy Duarte's book, which is Resonate. Actually, she has many books, so it might not have been Resonate. But Keegan, what do you think? How have you seen data viz evolving and any good books to recommend?
Yeah, this is a good question. So I have seen it evolving in several ways. So I think I've seen one arm of data viz that gets into these really, really complex, like very integrated and detailed visualizations that are just things we literally couldn't visualize before, right? Because visualization technology has gotten better. And there are entire sections of conferences that explore like fancy new visualization formats that just weren't computationally possible before. And so that's one area that I think is really, really cool. I'm blanking on like any examples at the moment, but just like being able to visualize more data and in different ways and get creative with how we actually visualize it. And that's kind of one approach, but that kind of like I mentioned before is really for the data people, right? Because like the average person isn't going to necessarily understand those more complex or detailed visualizations or new formats they've never seen before. The other thing I would say is like the other kind of angle is for more simple visualizations. I've seen a bit of a change in how people present the data. So there's a really interesting movement towards changing how we think about labeling our data visualizations and explaining them to people. And a couple of trends I really love are thinking about how we define legends and titles in creative ways to kind of help the user understand what they're seeing, or even we're seeing this more in like journalism, like data journalism, is actually interpreting a given point or piece of a graph for the user. So like an annotation on the chart itself that explains to you what a specific data point means. And that kind of helps center the user a little bit in, here's what this actually means for this one point. Okay, now zoom out and look at all these other points in this chart. Like a great example is on a scatter plot. If you interpret what one dot on the scatter plot means, that makes it easier for people to understand what all the other dots mean. So I think those are two very different kind of like tacks, but I think the increase in making charts more accessible in a lot of ways, but in particular making the interpretation of them more accessible is a really cool trend I'm seeing more and more these days. In terms of book recommendations, there are a ton. And one thing I'll say as a data viz researcher who like studies graphical perception and understanding of charts is that like almost every book has a ton of recommendations that are different from other books. And almost all books that are out there are heavily based on practitioner opinion. And I think part of being a data visualization person is that you have to kind of form your own style and your own opinions a little bit. So I wouldn't recommend any book over any other book, really. There's probably some I would say maybe we've disproven some of the old kind of old guard recommendations for visualization, but for the most part, I really think I've seen a bunch in the chat already that they're all great recommendations, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend one over another. I can't remember the name of it. A really good one is Jonathan Schwabish's book on it's like visualizing. I can't remember what it's called. That one's really good.
We'll find it.
Yeah, somebody will find it.
I'm giving you a side quest. Go find that book
Yeah.
for Keegan's and put it in the link in the chat.
The Policy Viz website probably has a link to it somewhere.
Zach just said, so what you're saying is all books are wrong, but some are useful. Haha,
Yes.
Zach, hilarious.
Yep, that's accurate.
All right, well, that was a fantastic question, Patrick. Thanks for asking. I saw Stephanie asked a question, and it kind of incorporates some other questions that I saw in the Slido. So, Stephanie, you asked a question about having federal clients. Would you be willing to ask that one live? I'm going to highlight it in Slido so it goes to the top.
Yeah, I'm Stephanie Zimmer. I'm at RTI. So I also work with Office of Federal Clients. I'm not asking anything too juicy because the times. But how do you interact with your clients? A lot of them are death by tables. And how do you sort of get them to modernize to use visualization that is not death by tables?
Yeah, no death by tables, but also the add-on to this from another anonymous question was sort of like any examples you could mention of things that are out there that are public we could look at would be cool.
Yeah. Yes, this is definitely a very common problem in this space where we work with a lot of federal clients, and partially because federal agencies have a lot of existing standards around how they report out data and things like that. I do think it's a challenge. I don't know if there's like a perfect strategy that I've found by any means, but I think one, this is going to sound silly, but showing them, like visualizing it rather than just telling them can sometimes be really effective. So even just sometimes showing them an alternative, like even if they didn't necessarily ask for it, can help get them a little bit on board with, oh, I really see the pattern now. And I also think there's been a bit of a shift towards more like public facing visualizations in the last couple of years, because I think there's been some tools that have come out and data explorers that have come out that have really shown people the benefits of visualizing the data. But I don't know. I mean, this one is just, I think, tricky, and it depends on the agency, but also sometimes even just the person who's overseeing the project, as I'm sure you're, you understand. But I think it's just almost like sometimes you have to show them the difference of like, here's what this looks like in a table. Here's how powerful this pattern or this finding could come through if you actually visualize it in this way and let people explore it that way.
All right, awesome. I have another couple of questions to roll in. We have so many questions on the Slido that I want to forge ahead. Thank you so much for that question, Stephanie. And my next one is Edward Leland. You had a question. If you're able to ask that live, I will tack on an anonymous question to the end of that one. We can combine them.
Yeah, sure. You want me to read the anonymous for you?
No, read your own, and I'll tack it on at the end.
All right, I got you. My question's just, what's the biggest mistake that you've seen in a public data explorer design? and it takes some like really nice data but makes it like completely unusable or just unworkable in terms of visualization. And how would you have fixed that if there's anything that just sticks in your mind?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
This is a good one. And the anonymous question that sort of goes along with this is just how do you decide what aspects to drop when something is too busy?
This is a good question. I'm trying to think. Maybe I'll answer the second one first because I'm trying to think. I mean, I've seen my fair share of like questionable public data explorers, but like nothing right now is totally coming to mind as like egregiously bad. I think the main thing that I experience that frustrates me as a user in public facing data explorers that's bad is lack of clear communication of what's going on. So it's sort of like there's a lot of like there's a million drop downs, a million options you have to select in order to pick your data. And it's not necessarily clear what you've actually selected. Maybe that's filtering it. Maybe that's how you want to group it or aggregate the data or something like that. And then you just get like a chart and the hover over, like if it's interactive, the hoverovers or tooltips might not really explain what's actually happening in the chart. The title might be very like dry, for lack of a better word. It might just be kind of like, here's what you queried. And the axis labels might not be super strong. And so like, I think this is a very common problem in government data portals and data explorers is that there's a lack of context and a lack of helping people actually understand what they're seeing. It's just kind of like, okay, great, you queried the data, here's a bar chart. And it doesn't really help you actually understand the bar chart. And sometimes it's not clear what the denominator is in the bar chart. If it's a percentage, what the numerator actually is, it's just showing you some value. And I think that's a big miss that I see a lot is lack of clear labeling. Like if I have to really think about like, how did this percentage get calculated? That's bad. Because like I think about data all day long. And we want to make sure that if people are accessing federal data, they don't have to think about data all day long to understand what they're seeing on a page. So yeah, I don't have I'm not gonna like give a specific example of one that I've seen that's bad. I'm sure there's a ton I could think of. But that I think is one of the bigger problems that we see. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
I think that you covered it. It was like
Okay.
how do you decide what to get rid of, what to drop?
Yeah.
So like if you're visualizing something and you kind of need multiple figures or dashboards to explain complex trends, but the stakeholders insist on fewer figures, what aspects, would you get rid of? Or how do you
Yeah,
decide? It's a big question, but I think you
it
did
is.
cover a lot of it.
Yeah, and I would say what we actually do is try to focus more on curating a specific view. So actually, this goes back a little bit to Laura's question about like, how do you get the right insights, even if people aren't necessarily asking the question in the right way? The approach that we try to take is focusing each view on a specific style of research question, or a specific type of data, or a specific, like, on this page, you can make a bunch of different choices about what you want to see, but the data you're going to see are always going to be in the same format so that you understand exactly what you're seeing. And also, I talked about this a little bit in my Posit conf talk last year, but we also try to make these what we call breadcrumb sentences. So the title on the page or on the chart actually interprets the chart for you a little bit. So when you're plugging in, an example on our live crime tracker site is if you want to look at crimes on a specific day and a specific crime type, we're filling in that sentence at the top. You filtered to, I want to look at aggravated assaults on, July 1st. The sentence at the top says aggravated assaults on July 1st. And we've kind of highlighted the selections that you made within that sentence, but it's very clear like what the context of the chart you're looking at actually is based on what you've selected. And then also, we try really hard to make hoverovers and tooltips on all of our interactives that basically like interpret the data for you. right? So if you hover over a specific bar in that chart, it'll say, there were 27 aggravated assaults in Chicago, Illinois on July 1st. This is a rate of however many per 100,000 residents. So we like it's kind of like, but instead of showing all the data you could possibly see on that page, we're instead really focusing out on like, you can explore the data in a specific way, but we're making sure that you understand exactly what you're seeing when you explore it in that specific way. And that I think actually ends up bringing more value than just like throwing a bunch of data at people, because it's a really focused exploration and answers a very specific question.
I like that. Thank you. And thank you for the fabulous questions, everybody. Edward, and then also our anonymous asker. Well, I saw that Abigail had asked a question in Slido. There's an asterisk there, meaning she can't ask it live, so I'm going to ask it for her. But this is a great question for the chat as well. So everybody, please feel free to weigh in. She says, my current data viz decision tree is Quarto for static things without a super high degree of complexity necessary, and then JavaScript otherwise. Is there a middle ground for Shiny, and what's the development situation like? Can I use sites with free tiers like Netlify or Vercel with Shiny apps? And there was a reply that I will just read here from Nathan in the chat that says, shinyapps.io and connect.posit.cloud have good free options. I totally agree. Posit Connect Cloud has been amazing for deploying Shiny apps. Definitely go check that out. But also sites like Netlify or GitHub pages that only support static websites don't work for Shiny because a server has to be listening to the user input. Any thoughts on this, Keegan? From your point of view, I know that you work at an organization that's hosting things, maybe not as an individual.
Yeah, I think you actually mostly covered it. I would say like, so all of our Shiny apps that involve pretty complex interaction, we host on either a Posit Connect server or on a Shiny server. And I am not aware, besides like Shiny Live, which I think is another option that's come out to kind of develop Shiny applications in the browser. I know like we've actually run into IT security issues with trying to use Shiny Live. So take that as you will if you work in an organization that has careful IT policies. But that's another option where you can actually like embed a Shiny app into a website. I'm gonna probably say this wrong, but I think it essentially like installs all the dependencies for the user in their own browser. So the first time they go to use it, it takes a while to load. But then after that, it's basically like a Shiny app just running in the browser, which is actually very, very cool. But that's another option if your Shiny app is like maybe a little bit smaller. There are also some interactive libraries where you can make an interactive widget that doesn't need to talk to a server. I would have to think about which ones that can actually work with. But there's some light interactivity you can do without a server. Yeah.
Deepsha Mangani did a talk on crosstalk in 2023, I think, in Chicago. That's a great example of like something where you can have things talk to each other, and when you change one thing, something else can change, but you don't necessarily need a Shiny server in the background doing stuff. Yeah, Tim Golden says crosstalk is awesome. I agree. Go play with crosstalk if you've never played with it. Maybe somebody will pop a link in the chat to Deepsha's talk from 2023. I can't remember the title of it, but it was really great. Well, thank you, Abigail, for that question. And if anybody has any extra tidbits on that sort of middle ground sweet spot for Shiny, please drop them in the chat. And I will say that, yes, Shiny Live is one of those things where there's that caveat where nothing is secret, right? Like it's all out there. If you have something that is going to be highly visible and is super public, I think that's a really good option. And if not, be more careful. But there might be some gray area there with intranets, right? With things that are like a net that's not exposed to the wider web. I'm not an expert. That's a great question. All right, let's take a look at our Slido here because we are 15 minutes to the end of the hour. I don't know how this hour goes by so quickly, but I wanted to pop in our sort of softball question. Nathan was kind enough to ask it for us, which is, about the sci-fi and fantasy books. Nathan, I will read it for you. Which sci-fi or fantasy book most influences the way you think about your work or data in general? Maybe none, but you could tell us a little bit about
Oh, wow.
a favorite fantasy or sci-fi book that you've read lately.
I'm trying to think if any really influence my day-to-day work.
I can't say that any have either, but I can say that I have
Yeah.
absolutely enjoyed some.
Yeah, I will. So I'll say, right now I just started reading the Expanse series, or the series that the Expanse is based on. I'm almost done with the first book, so no spoilies in the chat, please. And I'm really enjoying that. I also am a big fan of the Stormlight Archive series, though I got kind of stuck because if anyone knows that series, it's quite long and intense. So I need
Where
to
are you
pick that one
stuck?
back up. I'm stuck on the fourth book. So I know the fifth one just came out like earlier this
did.
year or late last year. But there's no real reason I'm stuck. I just kind of hit a cliff. And then one weird sleeper sci-fi book that people may or may not know about, and it's just odd. So it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, is the Gideon the Ninth series, by Tamsin Muir. It's a kind of dark and interesting. Yeah. It's really funny. It's got a different style of writing than most other sci-fi and fantasy I've read. So that
I'm gonna
one's
have to add that
another
to
good
my
one.
list. Awesome. Well, thank you for the question, Nathan, because I was just kind of dying to ask Keegan this question myself. If you're stuck on book 4 of Stormlight Archive, push through because it's so good. It's so good. I am currently stuck on book 5 because I don't want to read it and have it be over. I also have never heard of Gideon the Ninth, and I'm going to add that to my list. Everybody is saying that it is amazing in the chat. And the ones that I just read were I read The Tainted Cup, which was really, really good. And then the one after that, which I can't remember the name of. But we will move on. Everybody put your fabulous book recommendations in the chat. I had an anonymous question in Slido that I think was really great and approachable. And it's, what advice do you have for someone who's just getting started with interactive data viz? So there are lots of options out there: Shiny, Tableau, Power BI, others.
Yeah. This is a good question in the sense of, I think there are a lot of different ways you can approach it, and none of them are wrong, right? Data viz is a very multifaceted like process. So that means there's a lot of different tools you can use, like even within the R ecosystem. I saw some different people popping packages in the chat earlier of like, you can use Plotly, you can use Giraffe, you can use React Table, you can use GT. There's all sorts of different choices you can even make, even once you're in a specific framework like R. Then, like you mentioned, Libby, there's also, Tableau and Power BI. There's also pure JavaScript, things like D3 and Observable. And I think the real answer is like, there's not really a wrong choice. We actually use a lot of different approaches, really depending on the project. And for us, because we're like very client focused, it depends a lot on our clients' needs. But I will say, like, me and the people that I tend to work with have a very heavy Shiny bias, as you will not be surprised to learn, because it's the framework we're most comfortable with. And we actually think it's really powerful for a lot of reasons when we're working with data of various complexity. It's just often a really strong approach to build something for a reasonable amount of money, and that's really well designed and works well. So in terms of picking a stack, there's not really a wrong choice. I think the biggest advice that I would give is just to start playing around with stuff. If I were to go back and look at all of the charts that I made in grad school and even in my first couple of years at NORC, I would be like, wow, I did not know what I was doing, or like, wow, that's really ugly. But it's not. It's just that I was still developing my own skills and my own style and my own understanding of visualization. And I think it's easy to look at all these amazing visuals out there. I used to look at the Tidy Tuesday feed on like Stats Twitter and be like, who are these people? Like, they're amazing. They're coming up with these beautiful visualizations in like an hour. And I'm sure sometimes people took more than an hour, but
They do. They take many hours. Don't
Yes,
believe that.
yes. But I remember thinking like I will never be as good at that as these people. But really it was just that I hadn't played around with it enough, you know. And now, oh, let's see, 12 years into working in R, people come to me all the time with ggplot questions, and they're like, you're faster than Googling it. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. You could have just Googled it, but like, you know, I'm happy to answer the question, but I never would have like thought that that's where I would be when I started. So I think just give yourself some grace to just start small and like learn whatever system you want to start with and just play around with lots of different data. Tidy Tuesday is a great thing for that. It's just gives you lots of opportunities to try visualizing in different ways and getting creative, even if it's just recreating what someone else made. Like that's really good practice, actually. It's like, can I exactly recreate what someone else already did? And it takes some of the stress of having to make the decisions for yourself and helps you learn a little bit more how to actually just do it. And then once you get more comfortable with, okay, I know by heart how to make a stacked bar chart, how to make a bar chart, how to make a line chart, how to make a parallel sets diagram, like whatever you want to make, once you know those, then you start getting more comfortable with when you see new data, which way should it be visualized, and sort of making that choice for yourself.
I love that. I absolutely agree. Tidy Tuesday, if you have not explored it, it's just a GitHub repo. It's very approachable. I know that there has been a lot of like, oh, it's just for art. It's not. They're just CSV files. You can read it in anything that you use. And also, all of the newer ones have Python code for pulling in, as well as now Julia code for pulling in. And I will let everybody know that Tableau does have a Tableau Public where you can go play with things publicly. You don't have to have a license. I know that can be inaccessible. And my bit of advice here would be go develop in some of these things and ask yourself what parts of the process you liked or didn't like. Like, I don't love developing data viz in a point and click UI. It's not my favorite thing. So I steer away from Tableau and Power BI for that reason. I really like the flexibility of Shiny. And then do you really want to get into the nitty gritty? Do you really enjoy JavaScript? If you do, D3 might be a great option for you, right? Ask yourself what parts of the process and the journey you enjoy, because that definitely matters. Well, I want to hop in here really quickly just to give a shout out to everybody who is attending Conf for the first time and maybe giving their first Conf talk. And Keegan, I wanted to ask you if you had any advice on attending Conf for the first time or giving a talk for the first time.
Yeah. I'm not going to say don't be nervous, because you'll probably be nervous no matter what if you're giving a talk the first time. So I gave a talk for the first time in 2022 with a colleague of mine. We gave a joint presentation, and I think we were both so nervous. Like, he told me afterwards, like, I think I just skipped part of what I was supposed to say. You know, and I gave another one in 2024, and actually the room was a lot bigger and there were a lot more people there, and I felt less nervous. The first time might just be nerve-wracking, but I would just say, like, this, as evidenced by the chat, this community and the Posit Conf community is one of the most supportive communities out there, and you're not out there presenting in front of people who are going to be judging you. You're out there presenting in front of people who are excited to hear what you have to say and really just want to get to know you and get to know the cool thoughts that you're going to share, or the cool example, or the cool project, or whatever you're sharing. And it's a really cool opportunity to just show people a little bit of who you are and what you're interested in and what gets you excited. And so I know it's cliche to say don't be nervous, but it really is not like everyone's going to be staring at you and judging you. It's like everyone's excited to learn something today. That would be my advice.
Yeah, it's true. So maybe it's not don't be nervous, but trust the community to be great. Yeah. I see Megan Harris nodding. She says, yep, yeah. I will agree. I gave a lightning talk in 2023 and I felt like everything went wrong. I started my lightning talk and then all of a sudden I realized that the slides on the computer were advancing automatically. And I was like, what's going on? Like everything went out the window and I was terrified. And the moderator had to come help me, and then I had to start over. and everybody was so nice to me about it. It was just a wonderful, positive experience that could have been so scary if no one had said anything or cheered for me or laughed at all, right? Really trust the community. Rachel says she doesn't remember that part. Well, I clearly do. It left an impression on me. Um, well, we're about 5 minutes to the end, and I would love to fit in one more question if we could from Slido. Everybody asked such fantastic questions on Slido. So give me 1 second while I peruse here really quickly, because I think Tony had asked one that I really liked. There it is. Tony, I'm going to highlight your question in Slido if you're still here. Tony DePisa to ask that. That'd be great.
Hello,
There he is.
thanks very
Hey.
much, still here. So especially with the current climate and distrust of data sources and fake data and all that, how difficult is it, and how important is it to describe or show the lineage of the data so that people can trust your visualizations?
Yeah, this is a phenomenal question, and I would say it is both very important and very difficult. But it is totally worth it. So this is something we think about all the time, is the transparency. And like in my spare time when I'm not thinking about visualizations, I'm a reproducibility person as well. And so I'm also very focused on like that whole like traceability back to the original data source is of like the utmost importance. And I think it can be really challenging because you don't want to inundate the user with too much information. But one of the things we try to do is, you know, give people the option to explore the data source information. So there's 2 sites I'll mention. One is our live crime tracker, which I talked about a little bit, and I talked about a lot in my Posit Conf talk last year. When someone's looking at a specific city or a specific crime type, at the bottom, we have kind of the site, we have kind of all these details about that specific city's data. Or if it's a specific crime type, we print out what the actual definition of that crime type is. But we also have a whole methodology page where people can go explore how we actually grab the data and actually, for a specific city, pull up the link to their data portal that we're using. So they can go look for the data themselves. And that one's a little bit unique in that we're pulling data from like 55 different sources. Then for things like the Medicare Current Beneficiary Survey, so this is a project that NORC works on that's a survey of Medicare beneficiaries. We built this chart book website that's an interactive data explorer for all of the survey stats for that survey in a given year. And anytime someone is looking at a specific variable, we literally print out the measure construction from the survey, like underneath, and the definition of every single variable that's involved in the visualization on the page. This goes back to Stephanie's question earlier about federal clients. You know, they're very specific about all of those details being present. And so that one can be maybe a little more overwhelming, but you can toggle between like which details you want to see on that page as well. And so you don't have to look at all of them all at once. But I would say it's extremely important to do it. And it can be difficult to integrate it without overwhelming people, but it's still worth doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for that great question, Tony. It's a big one. I love it. And I'm glad I found it in the Slido. I'm like scrolling. I know he asked it somewhere. Well, I wanted to do one final shout. We have like 1 minute left. And it's to the link to Keegan's GitHub from her talk last year, actually, because Dave, thank you, Dave, had put in the chat like, hey, I just cloned and ran Keegan's repo from her talk last year to see the outline, and it ran immediately. She's not kidding about being into reproducible software. So he put that in the chat. I am going to paste it again in the chat. It is her Wait That's Shiny repo. Ah, yay, Rachel pasted it as well. So everybody can go check that out. It's extremely helpful to look at the bones of that. Dave, thank you so much for finding it and sharing it with us. All right, Keegan, thank you so much for joining us today. We have so many unanswered questions. Thank you all for asking them. Any parting words, Keegan, or anywhere people can find you? Is LinkedIn the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn's pretty good. I'm also on GitHub, but I'm not as active as I used to be, but I'm around there on my website, and LinkedIn is a good place to find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. And everybody have a wonderful weekend. And next week, Donnie Unardi is going to be with us, Principal Data Scientist at Genentech. I hope that you will come join me and talk to him. I love Donnie. He's so much fun, and it's going to be an amazing time, as always. If you found the chat super helpful today, go and save it. Top right corner of the chat, 3 dots that will let you save the chat so you don't lose it. Don't lose all of those amazing URLs. I'm going to stick around for just a second so everybody has a chance to save it. And reminder, if you enjoyed this and you would like to have friends come back with you, send us to them, pos.it/DSH. We would love to see them too. And we cannot wait to see you in the Posit Conf Discord server, which is opening up soon. The best way to get on that is to go register for PositConf. You don't have to register in person or virtual specifically to get on the Discord server. Either one. You're going to get an invite either way in your attendee portal. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week, everybody. Bye.
Hi, everyone.